So what if I told you a conflict happening thousands of kilometers away could be the trigger for the next crypto bull run or the next global crash? You might think I sound crazy and you might be skeptical about this. So let me just clear everything up. Right now, most people are watching Bitcoin charts, but the real story might be happening in oil markets, shipping routes and geopolitics. And if you understand this chain reaction early, you're already ahead of 99% of the market. And now let's talk about something most people are ignoring, the Houthis. So before I tell you what they are doing, let me just explain exactly what they are. So the Houthis, Houthis, whatever you want to call them, officially known as Ansar Allah, is a Zaidi revivalist and Shia Islamist political and military organization that emerged from Yemen in the 1990s. It's predominantly made up of Zaidis, whose namesake leadership is drawn largely from the Al-Houthi family. And so this group have been operating outside of Yemen and recently have been targeting ships in the Red Sea. And now we have a narrow passage called the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and it's one of the most important oil transit routes in the world. And if ships can't pass through here safely, then that means they have to find an alternative route, and the only route that they have is around Africa. And that trip, you can obviously imagine, will cost a lot more, it will take longer to get there, and most importantly, it puts pressure on these oil supply chains. But that is not the only choke point that we have. The other one we have is the Strait of Hormuz, which is at the top, and this is where roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through daily. As for the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, there's about 10% of the global trade that flows through this region. So overall, these are very important routes. And now if these routes get disrupted in serious ways, oil prices don't just rise, they spike violently. And historically, oil spikes are never isolated events. And they kind of ripple through the entire global economy. And now here's something that most of the crypto traders completely miss. Oil isn't just another commodity. It's the foundation of economic activity. So the things that happen when oil prices go up is that transportation becomes more expensive. You have manufacturing costs rising, food prices increasing, and energy bills surging. So according to the Federal Reserve, oil shocks don't hit instantly. The inflation impact builds over time, sometimes over multiple quarters. You can kind of understand what's going on from the charts. So once oil prices go up, you can see that the food goes up and so does the energy cost. But the thing is that it typically takes 2 to 4 months for rising oil prices to fully show up on inflation reports like the CPI. So by the time the data looks bad, the real damage, has already been building beneath the surface. So higher inflation would mean higher interest rates. Higher interest rates would then mean less liquidity, and less liquidity would put pressure on stocks and crypto. So this is why oil is often a leading indicator of market stress. Not immediate, but inevitable. So why does this matter for crypto? Crypto doesn't move in isolation anymore. It's deeply tied to global liquidity, risk appetite, and monetary policy. So when oil spikes, inflation also rises, which means central banks tighten. Then liquidity gets drained from the system, and when liquidity dries up, crypto struggles. But as always, there's a twist. If things can't get bad enough, central banks eventually reverse course. They start cutting rates, they start printing money again. And that's when crypto enters its most explosive phases. So oil is like the first domino in this chain reaction that eventually would lead to either a liquidity crunch or a liquidity explosion. So now rate cuts inject liquidity into financial markets and ease financial conditions, whereas low rates are linked to easier financial conditions and increased risk-taking. When central banks cut rates, liquidity increases, borrowing gets cheaper, financial conditions ease, and capital flows back into the markets. And now let's break this down into 2 possible paths that this could go. So scenario 1 would be kind of like a more controlled cycle where we get a ceasefire, markets calm down, growth continues through the next months and everything looks strong. But underneath, oil prices have already been rising And remember that 2 to 4 month delay. Later in the year, inflation spikes, markets realise the problem is too late, and central banks stay tight longer than expected. And then a sharp correction hits, which means stocks drop, but crypto pulls back, potentially leading into a longer downturn and possibly even stretching into 2027. But as always, there's an interesting part. Historically, toward the later phase of the US presidential cycles, there's strong incentive to stimulate the economy. So eventually, money printing returns, liquidity floods back in, and a major bull market begins. And this is a classic boom-bust reset cycle, whereas scenario 2 would be kind of like a darker path, and this is where things don't stay contained. And this would be where things don't get contained. So instead, we'd get conflict escalating, oil supply getting disrupted heavily, and prices shooting toward $150 plus. And well, all of this would cause, firstly, massive inflation, energy crisis, especially in Europe, currency instability, and global economic stress. And at that point, it's no longer just a correction. It becomes systematic, and in that kind of environment, everything becomes unpredictable. Markets don't follow clean cycles anymore. Liquidity doesn't behave normally, and crypto, well, it could either crash with everything else or become a hedge if trust in traditional systems collapses. But let's be honest, in that darker scenario, no one actually knows how exactly it would play out. So currently, I would keep an eye on oil, liquidity, and inflation, because crypto doesn't move first. It moves last in this domino effect. So I'll keep you guys updated as this develops so we can see how it all plays out in real time. And also, you'll find a link to Everdex in the description down below. It's a decentralized exchange that I use personally on a daily basis for trading. So definitely check it out if you haven't already. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.